Volume 12 contains works written around the very critical election campaign for the Second Duma. Of major concern for Lenin and the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party was the debate over collaborating with the legally recognized Liberal Cadet Party. The Menshevik faction of the RSDLP argued in favor of certain alliances, while Lenin insisted that the Bolsheviks must take a principled anti collaborationist position. In the Social Democratic election campaign in St. Petersburg, Lenin states that the Mensheviks and the Bundists are in favor of voting blocks, while the Bolsheviks, Lets, and Poles are opposed. He argues that the reasons for Menshevik position is that many opportunists are deserting the proletariat for the liberal bourgeoisie. The split within the party over the decision only serves the liberals and makes them pretty jubilant to see the Workers' Party being fractured. The danger is that many workers see the opportunism and petty disagreement within the party and then they settle for the liberal option. A major talking point of the cadets concerned the rise of the so called Black Hundreds, a reactionary pro monarchist bloc within Russia's government. In How to Vote in the St. Petersburg Elections, Lenin argues that the danger of the Black Hundreds is a myth promoted by the cadets to stave off the danger of the left. Their argument was that if workers voted for the RSDLP and refused to collaborate, then the Duma would end up with a rightist majority. He argues voters to vote with their conscience and their convictions and not out of fear, not too dissimilar to today, I guess. The urging seemed to work because while the Socialist Revolutionaries, the SRs, defeated the Social Democrats, Lenin says the SRs mainly defeated the Mensheviks, not Bolsheviks. The cadets won the second Duma elections in the capital, but despite that, the left overall triumphed, advancing from third to second place. The second Duma became the most radical yet, and Lenin hailed it as a sign that the workers were moving away from the center. This volume also contains the draft resolutions and tasks outlined for the Fifth Party Congress of the RSDLP. One shouldn't be surprised that Lenin's major points here involve an increase in political education among the workers, who are suffering increased destitution, a rejection of the Black Hundreds myth, and unity around the struggle against the liberal bourgeois and anarcho syndicalist trend in the party. It's also at this moment that a shift happens within the party, one that liberal critics and historians love to bring up. Mensheviks, despite their name, came to occupy the majority of the party's central committee, but Bolsheviks made up the majority of the St. Petersburg and Moscow regional committees. Let's take a break from Russian legislative history for a moment and turn toward an interesting text in this volume titled The Agrarian Question and the Forces of the Revolution. In it, Lenin argues that disputes over whether and how peasants should receive land are evenly split within the Duma. But however it plays out doesn't really matter. Giving the peasants land is not going to liberate the peasants from the forces of the market. And that's what separates the Bolshevik position from all others. It's not a matter of holding the property within a market economy, leaving it vulnerable to rent and monopolization. It's about freeing that property from the demands of the market. Nevertheless, workers must strive for all forms of liberation, even as a component of the bourgeois democratic revolution. The concept bourgeois revolution does not imply that it must be carried out only by the bourgeoisie, because the bourgeoisie will stop the revolution halfway for fear of workers and ally themselves with the right. It is thus the task of the workers, according to Lenin, to participate independently within the revolutionary moment. The final large piece in this volume concerns the so called Fifth Party Congress, or the London Congress. If you remember in a previous episode, the Mensheviks argued that the Third Party Congress was illegally convened, so they're unwilling to accept the name Fifth Party Congress. So much for petty disputes, right? As if that minor dispute doesn't signify enough, the Congress was a very heated one. Bolsheviks were in a clear majority, but the Mensheviks had enough allies to win support for a revolution that condemned, quote, expropriations, aka armed robbery, as a valid form of raising party funds. The Congress voted to disband militias within the party as a result. Lenin and many Bolsheviks disagreed. And interestingly enough, Joseph Stalin was present at this Congress and participated from a distance, and also participated later on in the Tbilisi bank robbery just a few months later. However, the majority of texts in this volume 12 concerning the Fifth Congress deal with the position of the party in relation to bourgeois parties. As this episode has already discussed at length, it's worth summarizing by saying that the Mensheviks, as the majority in the Central Committee, felt like their hands were tied by the Bolsheviks who controlled the capitals. Lenin had no sympathy for them and grew concerned with the number of amendments submitted to the draft resolutions. Simply put, the two factions were increasingly divergent over tactics, and the Mensheviks in particular seemed to be working with the cadets despite the protests of over half the party. Lenin always backed up his arguments with concrete examples, and he used the case of Fyodor Dan's supposed secret meeting with socialist revolutionaries, after which he didn't report to the St. Petersburg Committee. How can a party maintain trust when, it seemed to Lenin, certain high ranking members were wheeling and dealing behind the scenes? Thanks for listening, and until next month.